G'day guys, today I'm going to teach you some tips and tricks on how you can roll like a pro in competitive games of Warhammer 40k. I've got some dice here, we're going to roll them out, and I'm going to show you some really neat tricks on how to roll clearly, how to roll efficiently, and how to play 40k like a pro. Let's get stuck into it.
Log for the Blood God.
Blog for the Blood God exclusive high quality dice. Blog for the Blood God exclusive high quality dice. Blog for the Blood God exclusive high quality dice. Hi, I'm Dean Simbeck, President and CEO of Blog for the Blood God's exclusive high-quality dice warehouse and emporium. Due to a shipping error, I'm currently overstocked with Blog for the Blood God exclusive high-quality dice, and I'm passing the savings on to you! Roll 9-inch charges, pass invulnerable saves, roll high for damage, and score lots of hits. Check out the links in the description of this video to pick up your set today. Alright, first up a quick word on cocked dice. Now, cocked dice is any time when you roll a d6 and it doesn't land perfectly flat. So this could be an instance where it lands partially on the base of a model or partially on a piece of terrain, or sometimes, depending on the texture of the board, it can end up in a situation where it's not perfectly clear what result that dice represents. Now, I recommend here that you always just make sure you have a conversation with your opponent at the start of the game about what you personally consider a cocked dice. Because sometimes it'll be on a slight angle because it's on a base, but it's very clearly close enough to that clear result, and other times it's a little bit less transparent. So making sure that you're clear with your opponent on how to do this. There is no right or wrong way to go about approaching cocked dice, as long as you're having the conversation and you and your opponent agree at the start of the game. So you don't want to get in a situation where partway through a turn you're like, I think that dice is cocked, and your opponent's like, no, it's very obviously a 5, you know. So make sure you have the conversation at the start, and when in doubt, I highly recommend bringing a dice tray. When you've got a dice tray, it becomes so much easier. You just say anything that's not in the tray is considered cocked and will need to be re-rolled, and everything that's in the tray should be perfectly flat because the tray is flat, there's no models in it, and there's no reason for it to be cocked. The only exception to this with dice trays is if you've got a pile of dice like so, and when you roll it, some dice land on top of others like this. Now, my personal rule for this is any dice that lands on top needs to be re-rolled. So in this case, I would pick up that one, I'd pick up that one, pick up that one, and even this one that's very obviously not flat, I'd pick those all up, and I would re-roll those dice. And that's a way that you can make sure that every dice that's rolled is clear and is able to be understood by your opponent. The next important trick is removing your failed rolls. So this is really, really important. And it's not only a faster way of playing the game, but it's also a much clearer way for your opponent. So let's say you've got a bunch of Khorne Berserkers here, and they're attacking and they're hitting on a 3+. You want to roll your dice like so, and then you basically want to remove anything that's not a 3+. So these are all your fails. So we're removing fails here. And the reason that we do that is because once you've removed them, like so, you can now invite your opponent to confirm that roll. You can be like, cool, looking at that, can you see any other 1s or 2s? And they'll be like, nope, they're all hits, right? And then you can be like, cool, now I'm going to take these and I'm going to do my wound rolls. And because you've removed all of your failures, and you've got them in one hand here, the remaining dice, you can now just roll them to wound. Let's say you're wounding on a 3+, so you can be like, cool, that one's a fail, that one's a fail. So there's my successful wounds, and then your opponent can pick up those same dice again, roll their saves. Let's say they get a 4-up save, they can remove the fails, and now you know that there's 4 successful save rolls and 4 casualties. So not only does it make it clearer because your opponent can verify the roll at any point, you also make it more efficient by removing the fails. You remove the dice that no longer need to be rolled, and you just leave the remaining pool of dice that do need to be rolled, so you can just keep rolling in the tray. You pick up everything that's in the tray, roll it back into the tray, and it's a much more efficient way of operating. It also means that when your opponent has things like a feel no pain save, or if you have rerolls, you can do various things inside here. So for example, we say we're hitting on 3s again, we've got those Khorne Berserkers, but Angron is nearby, right? So Angron's giving the unit rerolls. You can pull out your failures, right? Give your opponent an opportunity to confirm, yep, they're all successful hits, pull them to the side, and then these dice that we've just removed, that were our failures, we can re-roll them. And they're already in your hand, you don't have to count them out, you don't have to do anything weird, and there you go, you've got your re-rolls there, and they're all your hits. Same goes for saving throws. Let's say hypothetically your opponent's got a 2-up, so say a 3-up save. They roll their saving throws. They pull out their failed saves, right? On their 3-up. Oh, that was a rubbish roll. So they pull out their saves. Then let's say they have a feel no pain. So you go, cool, these are successful saves, and they have a 6-up feel no pain, right? So say these are 1 damage attacks coming into your Khorne Berserkers. You go, cool, re-rolling that, and you go, cool. These ones are now, these 6s are successful feel no pains. So they come out, and then what's left here are your fail saves. And then you go, that's 1, 2, 3 dead Berserkers. So that's the importance of removing your failed rolls. It protects you from any instances where your opponent maybe misunderstood what you did. Because if you go like this, and go, cool, I'm going to reroll that one because it's on top, and you pull out your successful 3-ups, you might go something like this, where you're pulling out your successes, and you just grab that 1, and your opponent, doesn't see it, and then you go grab that 2, and then all of a sudden your opponent goes, oh, I'm pretty sure you just grabbed the 2 there, and you're like, nah, that was a 5. And your opponent can't verify it because it's not still on the board, right? It's in your hand now. So if you're removing your successes and you accidentally grab a fail, you can't verify that it was a fail or a success because it's no longer there. So that's the importance of removing your failed saving throws and failed dice rolls in general. The next point is on sustained hits. So this one, obviously, there's a lot of different ways that you can get sustained hits in the game, and it impacts the amount of dice you roll. My advice when rolling your sustained hits is to roll your attacks, then pull out your failures. So say we're Khorne Berserkers again, we're hitting on 3-up, and we have sustained hits from our Blessings of Khorne. Once you've pulled out all your failures, you get your opponent to verify, yep, cool, they're all your failures. And then what I do is I put back in from my failure dice the sustained hits, and I put them on top of the existing 6s. And that way you can now look at it and go, cool, I see no 6s, so that means that everything that's left in there are hits, and everything that's in my hand were misses. And that way you're basically adding those additional hits. Another way that you can do it is you can just roll the dice and then just take the 6s out first. The problem with doing it that way is, like I said before, you might accidentally grab a 5 and be like, and your opponent be like, that was a 5, and you're like, I'm pretty sure it was a 6, and they're like, no, it's a 5, and there's no way to verify. Or vice versa, you might actually grab a 6, and your opponent might say, that wasn't a 6, that was a 5, and you've got no way to verify. So I recommend leaving the 6s in the pool, taking out your misses, like so, and then placing back in dice to represent those additional hits. So that's the best way to record additional hits from your sustained. Next we have how to do lethal hits. This one's somewhat similar. I recommend just rolling your dice, pulling out your failures as normal. That's a pretty good roll. And then what I do is I get my opponent to verify. So you go, cool, there's 2 6s there, do you agree? And your opponent will go, yes, there are 2 6s, and these are lethal hits. So you pull them out to the side, because you actually don't need to roll those wound rolls, because you've already wounded with those due to the fact that they're lethal. So then you take everything else, those 2 6s are already wounds, they're off to the side, and then you roll your wound rolls, and you go, cool, I'm wounding on 3s, so you go, cool, I'm going to pull out those 1s and 2s, pull out your fails, and you go, cool, that is now the successful wound rolls. So you sort of pull out your 6s there, but you make sure that you're very clear with your opponent that they are verifying that they are indeed your lethal hits. Next is the fun when you have lethal and sustained hits. Now this is something that World Eaters have pretty common, because you can get both of those from your Blessings of Khorne, and it affects you army-wide. So getting really good at this is going to be quite important. So let's say we've got Khorne Berserkers again, because they're a great easy example, and they have lethal and sustained hits active. You basically roll, and what I do is, once again, you pull out your fails. We're hitting on 3s because we are Khorne Berserkers. So, there's one there. That's another advantage to the pulling out your fails, is you might go, okay, cool, opponent, can you clarify? And they'll be like, yeah, you missed that 2 over there. And then you go like, oh, yep, good spot. You pull out the 2. Now you get them to verify again, and they're happy with that. As we can see in there is 2 6s. So if you just had sustained, you would put those 2 6s in. If you just had lethal, you would take those 2 6s and put them in your wound pool. However, what we're doing here is we're just going to take an additional 2 dice from our misses, and we're going to put them straight into our wound pool. And then we're going to re-roll all of this to wound. So the idea here is that those 2 additional hits go in, and the 2 wounds come straight out, in which case you can just take 2 of your misses and put them straight into the wound pool, and then you can roll your to wound roll, pulling out your failures, and now you know that that is your wound roll. So just to clarify that, if you're rolling your dice, you've got only 1 6 in there, so this will be a nice easy example. You've got 1 6. This 6 is an automatic wound, right? So it comes out here, but it is also an additional hit. So if we then pull out our fails, that 1 6 is an automatic wound, but we also get an additional hit roll from our sustained hits. So basically, instead of pulling the 6 out and then putting it back in, I just take one of my misses, chuck it over as an auto wound, and then re-roll the whole lot. So that's my trick for sustained and lethal hits. Next, we get into the number of attacks. So there's a number of units in the game that'll have a random number of attacks. So let's say you've got a Forge Fiend from World Eaters. I'm going to use World Eaters examples for all of this, but that obviously applies to every faction. It's got 3 ectoplasma cannons, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to roll your D3s, and then basically what I do is I go, cool, that's a 1, right? So on a D3 result, that's a 1. That 5 is a 3, so what I do is I just put 2 dice next to it, and then that 3 is a 2. And now your opponent can very clearly see what you rolled. This is also another reason why having multiple colored dice is very good, because what I like to do in a perfect scenario is I'll roll 3 red dice. This is my random number of shots, and then what I do is I go, cool, that's a D3 which is a 2, that's a D3 which is a 3, and that's a D3 that's a 1. And then your opponent can clearly see what you've added to where and how many shots you got. And that way also if you go cool, and then also it's blast, so you might go cool, each one gets an additional shot because it's a unit of 5, and that's your number of attacks. And then you can roll out your hit rolls, your wound rolls, your sustained hits if you have them, those sorts of things. So having 2 different colored of dice makes this really, really helpful, particularly when you've got lots of dice. Whereas the last thing you want to do is roll your hit roll and go like, your random number of attacks and go like that, and then just be like, yep, cool, that's 5 attacks. Because your opponent will be like, well, hang on, wasn't that like a 3, like 4 attacks? Because you had a 1, a 2, and a 1, and all of a sudden you've picked up the dice and it's too late. It gets much harder to track that way. So I recommend having 2 colors of dice, rolling out your number of attacks, and then in this case you can be like, yep, cool, there's 3 attacks there, 3 attacks there, 3 attacks there. That's my number of attacks, right? And then you go, and then we've also got blast, so you put 1 more in, and then you might, have also the weapon itself might be D6 plus 2 or something like that. So then you go, cool, we got another 2 there, 2 there, and 2 there, and you basically just add them in based on the rules. So your opponent very clearly sees exactly how many attacks you have and from where those attacks are coming. Same goes for D6 weapons. You might go, cool, I've got 3 dice here, I'm going to roll them out and go, cool, I've got 4 attacks off of that weapon. I've got 5 attacks off of that weapon. And then I've got 1 attack off of that top one. And there's my dice rolls. And now I get to roll my hit rolls. So that's the best way, in my experience, of rolling your number of attacks. Next we have Feel No Pain saves, when you have multi-damage weapons coming into multi-wound models. Now this is probably one of the more complex things, so let's roll it out. Let's say we've got a unit of Exalted 8-bound who have a 5-up Feel No Pain, and they're being shot by 2 damage weapons, right? So they've been hit, they've been wounded, their opponent's handed us these saves. So these are the save throws we're going to make. So we're going to have 5-up invulnerable save, these are like plasma guns or something like that. So you roll your invulnerable save, and then what I do here is you pull out your fails, as we discussed previously. So you go, cool, that's my fails, so your opponent can then confirm, yep, they're all successful saves, so you can get rid of those. And now you go, cool, these are my failed saves. Now, these all need to take Feel No Pains, right? They need to take 2 damage each. Now, there's a few ways that you could do this, but easily the best way is to take the amount of failed saves that you got, which in this case was 11, right? And grab an additional 11 dice because you're being hit by 2 damage weapons. So you grab an additional 11 dice. So that's 6 there, 10 there, 11, right? And now, because they were 2 damage, you go, cool, here is 22 dice. This is how much damage I've taken. And then because 8-bound are 3 wound models, right, you can take these in lots of 2, right? So you grab 2 at a time, but because you've got 3 wounds on your first guy, it would take a minimum of 2 shots to kill him, right? Because 1 shot, even if you failed both Feel No Pains, isn't going to kill you. So you're going to be able to take 2 shots, which is 4 dice, and you roll those Feel No Pains, and you go, cool, we passed 2 of those, failed 2 of those. So now that 8-bound has 1 wound left, which means 1 more shot could kill him. So you grab 1 more shot, which is 2 damage, roll your Feel No Pains, they both passed. Then you take another shot, 2 damage, 1 pass, 1 failed. So now you've failed 3 of them, so that's 1 8-bound dead. And then what I do is I stack all 3 dice on top of each other, put them off to the side, and I keep these dice to the side. So now you know that's how many have passed, that's how many have failed, and now we've lost 1 8-bound, alright? So now we can go back to rolling them 4 at a time, because it's 2 shots at 2 damage. Rolling your saves, cool, 1 failed, 3 passed. So that means that 8-bound now has 2 wounds left, because 1 of his Feel No Pains failed. So now you need to go back to 1 at a time, and roll them 2. So those 2 failed, so that's a dead 8-bound. So stack them on top of each other, move it off to the side. Now we go back to 4, which is 2 shots at 2 damage. Okay, we passed 1, failed 3, so that's a dead 8-bound. And then we've got 4 left in our hand, and we go, cool, all 4 of them failed, so that's another dead 8-bound. So if you do it that way, you can see how many 8-bound died, which is 4. You can also, at any point, if your opponent questions whether or not this is being done correctly, you can give them the dice and be like, well, this is how many dice you handed me, which is double the amount of wounds you did because you're 2 damage. If you were 3 damage, you would times it by 3. If you were 4 damage, you would times it by 4. But basically, they know how much damage they've done to you, you've taken the damage, and then you're basically rolling them in lots equal to the damage characteristic of the weapon based on the number of wounds that you have. I hope that makes sense. So I'll give you a few more examples and hopefully that'll help clear it up a little bit. So let's say they're hitting your Terminators with 4 damage weapons. You got World Eaters Terminators, 4 damage weapons, and you've got your 4-up invulnerable save, right? So you go, cool, rolling my saves. So pulling out my failures on my 4-up invulnerable save. Like that. So your opponent agrees that they're all successful saves, so they pull those dice out, put them off to the side. So this is how many saves we failed, right? So now what you do is you basically just go, cool, that is 12 saves failed, and I'm being hit by 4 damage weapons. So what you want to do is you want to grab 12 times 4 for 48 damage, and you'll have 48 dice in your hand, and then you just roll them 4 at a time until all of those Terminators have taken their Feel No Pains. Because they're a 4 damage weapon, their damage exceeds your wounds characteristic, you can just roll them 4 at a time. If their damage doesn't exceed your wounds, so say you've got a 3 wound model and you're being hit by 2 damage weapons, you know that a single shot can't kill you, so you can roll 2 at a time. So that's just one way that you can make sure. The main thing to note here is that the damage characteristic that you're being dealt times the number of wounds you failed is the total damage being dealt to your unit, and then you basically want to make sure you have that many dice. So if they go, cool, let's say hypothetically they hit you with, 5, you fail 5 saves and they're 3 damage shots. You go, cool, 5 saves have failed, each one is a 3 damage shot. So this might be a clearer way of doing it. Go, cool, 5 have failed, each is a 3 damage shot. So we're going to go 3 there, 3 there, 3 there, 3 there, 3 there, right? So 5 failed saves, then you can pick that up and you can just roll them 3 at a time. Cool. 1 passed, 2 failed. Next one. 1 passed, these failed, and that's 1 dead Terminator, right? Because now you've taken 4 wounds. Then you got the next 3 damage shot. That all 3 of those failed, so that's a dead Terminator, so I stack them on top, put them off to the side. Next 3 damage shot is 2 pass. one failed, and then the next 3 damage shot kills, because all 4 of those failed. So now we know that based on that, 3 Terminators died. So that's one of the pro tips on how to roll your Feel No Pain if you have multi-wound models. Next is how to do multi-damage weapons when you have a Feel No Pain into single wound models. So let's say we've got a unit of Jackals, right? And the opponent's going in like this. Let's say they are like Hellblasters with their 2 damage weapons or something to that effect. They're rolling to hit, so they're hitting on 3s. So they roll their hit rolls, they pull out their fails because they are a pro and they know this trick. So they've pulled out their fails. Lucky for us, they didn't roll particularly well there. Then say they're wounding us on 2s because they're, just high strength. They're plasma guns. They're wounding on 2s, so they pull out their fails, of which there was only 2 there. So now we go, cool. There's this many failed saves, right? Which is, let me just line them up. Is 9 failed saves, right? Or 9 wounds, successful wounds. So we're going to get no armor save here because they're plasma guns. So what you can do here is you could do the same trick and you could go, I'm going to grab another 9 dice because these are 2 damage attacks. And then because the 2 damage exceeds my wounds characteristic, I'm just going to roll them 2 at a time. And only successful double 5s or double 6s are going to keep me alive. That's one way that you could do it. Or you could take the whole lot, just roll that, and then re-roll any successes. So you pull out your successes there, or you put your fails over to the side. There your successes, and then you re-roll those. And there you can see that that one and that one live. So of that, they killed 7. And the reason that we're saying that these 2 live is because those dice rolled consecutive 5-ups. They rolled a 5-up into another 5-up, which means that one shot tanked 2 5-up Feel No Pains, right? So to give you another example of that, if we were to take those 9 dice, it was 9, correct? Yep, 9. If we were to grab 9 more dice, like so, and then roll them 2 at a time, you'd be like, cool, that Jackal dies because he didn't pass a Feel No Pain. That Jackal dies, didn't pass his Feel No Pain. He passed 1 but failed 1, and because they only have a single wound, that means he dies. He dies. He dies. Come on, Feel No Pains. He dies. He dies. He dies. And he dies. So in that instance, none of them rolled a double 5+, double 6, or a 5 and a 6. And because they're 2 damage shots, you'd need to roll, both of them need to be a 5 or a 6. But essentially the same process happens if you just roll 9 dice, which I have here, 9 dice, and go, cool. Of those 9, we're calling these ones here, that was a 6, they're successfuls, right? And now, if we roll those again, this is like that second dice, because all of those ones, it doesn't matter what the second dice is, they're fails, right? So they're going to die. Whereas these ones, if we roll another 5, 6, they would live. We go like that, cool. We didn't roll any additional 5s or 6s, so those guys die as well. So it's just a much faster way of doing it, is to re-roll your successes when you're being hit by multi-damage weapons. You're a single wound model with a Feel No Pain. It's just much faster to re-roll your successful Feel No Pains in that instance. And if you were being hit by 3 damage weapons, you would have to re-roll your successes into your successes. So let's take a bigger pool of dice so that we can make sure that we get some successes here. Say you got a unit of Jackals with a 5-up Feel No Pain being hit by 3 damage weapons, right? You would go, cool, roll my Feel No Pains. You would pull out your successes, which in this case weren't many. That was atrocious. But 4. And then we're going to re-roll our successes. And we got a 5 there. So he's still alive, but he has to make 1 more. Yay! So that 1 Jackal would live, because he rolled 3. He got hit by a 3 damage attack, and he rolled 3 5+s. So that's a trick on multi-wound models. Multi-damage weapons into single wound models. Now random damage weapons into multiple wound models. So this is where it gets a little bit more tricky. Say you got 3 wound Terminators, and let's say for argument's sake that they don't have a Feel No Pain, just to make it a little bit more clear here. and your opponent goes, cool, I've hit you, this many times, however many this is, you got these many wounds, you roll your 4 up invulnerable saves, you go, cool, I'm going to pull out my successes, my fails, as discussed. So there, fails. Just going to get rid of those dice out of my hand. So these are our fails, these are our successes. Your opponent confirms the successes, moves them off to the side, and then your opponent now gets to do this many dice worth of damage to you. Alright? If they just roll like this and go, cool, they're d6 damage, and they go like that, you have a problem. Because this would kill, that would kill, that would kill, and that would kill instantly, but these two wouldn't, right? And now the order in which they roll these is really important, because if they had rolled the 1 first, that doesn't kill the Terminator, then they roll the 6, that kills the Terminator, then they roll the 2, then they roll the 3, then they roll the 4, and then the 6, that would kill 4 Terminators. Whereas instead, if they rolled the 1, then the 2, then the 3, then the 5, then the 4, then the 6, now they're killing 5 Terminators. So it's really important the sequence that they roll these. So there's 2 ways you can do that. One of them is to roll them one at a time and just go, cool, I'm rolling that, okay, that's 4 damage. Now your opponent goes, that's 1 dead Terminator. Then they roll another, then they roll another, and they can do it that way. However, that's kind of slow. So what I tend to try to do is, if I've got multi-damage weapons, particularly if your opponent doesn't have a Feel No Pain save, right? You can just go, I'm going to roll these all at once, and the order in which they count as having been rolled is left to right. So you go like that, and then you just go, cool, from left to right. So I rolled a 2, then a 3, then a 2, then a 6, then a 4, then a 6. And that way you can just go, cool, that 2 doesn't kill a Terminator, that one does, that doesn't kill a Terminator, then that one does, then that one, and then that one. And that way it's much, much faster to roll them out. It's also worth noting that if your opponent, if you have a Feel No Pain, now when they go, cool, I'm going to roll the damage into you, and they roll them this time they're going to probably want to roll them 1 at a time. They go, cool, 5 damage, you roll 5 Feel No Pains. That kills a Terminator. Then they're going to roll 3 damage, and you have to roll 3 Feel No Pains. You can do something like this, where it's like the first roll they go, okay, that's a 2, that doesn't kill a Terminator, so then they roll their second one and they go, cool, 8, that does kill a Terminator. So in that instance, you'd grab 8 saves and roll your Feel No Pains. So there's a few ways that you can do that. Just make sure that you're super clear with your opponent on which of these methods you're going to do, and when in doubt, resort to the simplest one, which is just they roll their damage, you then roll your Feel No Pains, and you go, cool, recording 2 wounds on that Terminator. Then they roll their damage for the next attack, you roll your Feel No Pains, and that Terminator is now dead. That's the safest way to do it, but there are some much more efficient ways of rolling Feel No Pain when you're being hit by multiple damage weapons. Alrighty guys, I hope you enjoyed that short video about some tips and tricks on how you can roll like a pro. The goal of this video is to give you some more efficient ways of rolling, but the primary thing is making sure that your rolls are transparent and clear. That point about making sure that you're removing your failures is so important, and it's arguably a mandatory practice in tournament games, because if you're removing successes, there's no way to verify, and it opens up a lot of issues if you're not careful. So I strongly recommend that you remove your failures, and then some of these other tricks are just quality of life things that allow you to get games done a little bit faster, a little bit clearer, and a little bit cleaner. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments section below, and if you want to learn more tricks like this, join us over on Patreon. We have a Discord community there where we work on player development. We also share memes and hobby updates and progress. We do regular calls. We have a lot of fun over there, so check that out. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like, subscribe, comment, all that good shit, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.
The Warhammer community suffers from some of the most prohibitively expensive essentials in the world, especially Australian content creators. Every single day, Dean wants to create content, but he can't. Suffering from old, worn-out brushes, expensive model kits, and costly software and equipment, he can't endure much longer. Just look at this dirty paint water. Would you drink this? Would you let your child? Even a small monthly donation can help provide Dean with clean paint water, basic tools for survival, and access to life-saving information and education. So please, Follow the links in the description below and find out how you can sponsor a mad cunt like Dean today and end the suffering. Suffering that is cruel, unsustainable,